All right. So this is Andrew Stotts from Careers in Finance, talking with Paul Gambles. And Paul, why don't you take a moment and introduce yourself and tell everybody what you're doing now, and then later we'll figure out how the heck you got there.
Okay, so right now I'm director of an SEC licensed investment advisory firm here in Thailand. As you know, Andrew, I've been here for 26 years. My original plan was to come here for maybe 2 or 3 years, like a lot of us. But then I found enough good reasons to stay, I guess. It's been a real interesting time, really interesting time to live in Thailand. It's been a real privilege, but it's also been a really interesting time, I think, to be in the investment world, the investment profession, and see how that's changed over those years as well.
That's actually it's a really good point. You have a very deep perspective as to where it was and where it is now, and I know you have strong opinions about where it's going, and I think that young people who are beginning careers in finance need to hear that. So yeah, continue.
Well, that's all the gray hairs. That's where they came from. So my background was actually, when I left university, I had no idea what I wanted to do with life, and I got suckered in to an advert that convinced me that working for the British Civil Service would be the most interesting thing I could do. So I did that for about 3 years, and because I was working on the taxation side, which were quasi-accounting skills, but with tax planning, then as expected, I guess, or as anticipated, a bank came along and offered me a role working in their corporate finance department. And I did that for a number of years, found out that maybe the world of corporate finance wasn't exactly as I thought it would be, from having watched a couple of 1980s movies. And before I knew it, I got headhunted and offered the chance to come to Thailand, which I did. I worked for an organization for a couple of years, then found out again that maybe their way of doing things wasn't exactly what I'd expected. So being still relatively young and pretty bullheaded, I figured out the only way to make sure that things were done the way I wanted would be to start my own firm, which MBMG started in the mid-90s.
That's pretty remarkable. I mean, I was still a pretty young guy, I guess, at that time, and I didn't have any clue about setting up something like that. What was in your head when and for a young person that starts to think that they want to set up their own firm, after 5 or 10 or 20 years or whatever that level of experience, what are the critical things that matter when you're making that decision?
So I think the key things for me were that I had an idea of what I wanted to do, but I was absolutely certain of what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to do, the things that I've been doing in the civil service for 3 years. I didn't want to do the things I've been doing in the bank. I didn't want to do the things that I've been doing working in an investment firm for somebody else. And I think, to an extent, you've got to be young enough to feel that, yes, you can go and change things and you do things your own way. The older and more cynical we get, then, maybe the less inclined we are to think that. But I really, figured after 3 attempts at working for other people, and none of which had really fitted in with what I thought we should be doing or what the world should be like, then I figured, well, okay, the only way to get a boss that you're not going to complain about is to go and become your own boss.
Which can sometimes be the toughest situation too. A lot of times people go into it thinking, oh, that's going to be great. I'm going to have lots of free time, be my own boss. And then you wake up at 2 in the morning. You wake up at 2 in the morning thinking, how the hell am I going to pay payroll?
Well, no, exactly. You have to be ready. But I guess the good thing is, when I'd grown up, my parents had run their own businesses, so I guess that gave me a bit of an insight into it. I wasn't going in with rose-tinted spectacles or anything like that. I knew what I thought were some of the downsides. And to say, the key thing for me were that, the important decisions, the decisions about, values, the things that really matter. those ones were things that you can dictate yourself if it's your name above the shop.
Mm. So tell me just, what has really been the biggest changes that you've seen with, over the years, and how does that determine where a young person should be looking, as they are looking out for a career in finance?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I'm not even sure I can answer it because I think that's still kind of a work in progress, to be honest, because the industry is still changing, and hopefully I'm still changing. Because as I was saying to you earlier, the dinosaurs didn't change, and we all know what happened to them. So I guess if one thing that a lot of people in finance complain about is regulation, and sometimes with some justification, because it's not always logical where the benefits lie. But actually, I think that what I've seen in the 25 years and 6 years that I've been here in Thailand is that the level of regulation has improved, and it's also in a lot of areas it's very it's sophisticated in terms of understanding what needs to be regulated. Yeah, how to actually go and avoid those conflicts of interest and those issues that really end up damaging clients. And so I think that's been the biggest step forward. We set up the firm that I'm currently director of, MBMG Investment Advisory, in 2012, largely because the SEC came to us at that stage and said that landscapes were changing here in Thailand, and they wanted to apply an investment advisory license to certain activities. So we went along with that. One of the criteria was it was entirely fee-based, or primarily fee-based, and that obviously removes conflict of interest. And I think the SEC within that particular license have set up a really good, really workable structure that actually benefits the clients. We're really happy to be working under that these days, but would we have ever chosen that ourselves without that prod from the SEC to say, hey guys, this is the way the business is going to be in future? I could tell people yeah, I'm sure we would have, but I'm not sure I think that's a bit disingenuous. I think whoever we are and however principled or whatever we think we are, it still doesn't hurt to have somebody looking over your shoulder, making sure you're doing the right thing. So I think the advances in regulation globally, but primarily here in Thailand, Thailand has come from what I would say was a pretty low bar back in the mid-90s to certainly in our sector a pretty sophisticated one today. And that's been a pretty good journey. I mean, we've been lucky enough to go along with it.
I was talking to my first boss in the industry. I worked for him in 1993, John Shrimpton, who later went and set up Dragon Capital. And John was saying recently, he said, "I'm long compliance."
Exactly.
And for the people listening out there, it means that if you want to guarantee yourself a job in the world of finance, go work in compliance, because that department just keeps growing, and it seems like it's never ending.
And I think the good thing is, it is seeping into, that mentality is seeping into all aspects of the profession these days. It's not got to where it should be, but I think that's the future. The people that are watching this, the people that you're training and educating, the biggest thing for them is that there's a real push, there's a real move towards doing things better in the future than we do them today, and they've got to be part of that movement. They've got to buy into it. They've got to want to do it. In the 80s. In the UK, where I was at the time when I was working in banking, well, it was the cliche was sort of, barrow boys from Essex markets were the ones who were going into broking or whatever else to go make a huge amount of money in a very short period of time, and won't be charged if you got in the way. And that was the sort of mentality. These days, I like to think that the industry has got a lot more professional, and like I said, I think the future is that it's got to keep going that way. The sophistication and the improvement in regulation, that's got to continue, and anybody coming into the industry has really got to buy into, wanting to be a part of something that is, it's a much better proposition. It's a much better proposition for clients, for all constituents in the future than it has been in the past. The downside to that is, and maybe this is the other thing that puts up Essex Borough Boys these days, that we have to accept that you can't maybe go and make the kinds of returns as a business or as an individual operating in these sectors today, and probably even more so in the future. We're seeing a huge amount of consolidation amongst asset management companies these days, even the biggest ones in the world, because of the fact that margins are shrinking. Now, I think the key message is you've got to embrace that. You've got to, want to get into an industry where it's not going to be get rich quick, and it is going to be about, much smaller but much more sustainable margins for providing services to people.
So it, like I say when I talk about ethics, is that, you don't come into this industry thinking I'm going to get rich. You've got it in reverse. Come into this industry thinking I'm going to get my clients rich, and then you'll be taken care of, and, be ethical in the way you do it. And you won't have to market yourself so much because people appreciate, the loyalty and, that type of thing.
Definitely, but that's a big change. That is a big change from when we started out in the industry and some of the characters that were around in that.
So let's try to wrap up by talking just a little bit about what are the skills. I mean, let's just say, what are the types of skills that people should know if they want to work in this industry? Compared to when we started, it was like basically anybody could. You could just be a good writer and you'd get a job. Exactly. As an example.
I wouldn't hire me today. I'd be looking for somebody a lot better than me. I think that's absolutely right. And again, one of the things that it took me a long time to realize about that application is that the sort of empirical basis, the scientific basis, the knowledge basis was actually pretty damn weak. It's got better, and it's on an exponentially sort of increasing curve. But and it's not necessarily just our profession. I think it's most egregious, it's most obvious in what we do. But even things like only a couple of years ago, the economists realized how money actually got created in the world. They've got some false idea of how money was actually made. And the Bank of England wrote a seminal paper about 3-4 years ago saying, "Oops, we didn't realize either that this is what happens." And so I think the basis of knowledge now is it's there. It needs to improve, but it's getting better every day. And I think people need those. They need those inquiring skills, almost scientific skills. As you say, it used to be about narrative. It used to be about, hey, who could tell the best story to clients, and we believe them, I'm sure, but actually we didn't realize that there wasn't a great basis to a lot of the things that everybody was saying. Whereas now I think we're a lot more inquisitive, a lot more skeptical, and I think the basic knowledge is there. And I think you've to some extent, it's one of the things perhaps you have to thank the internet for, that anybody can now find out a lot of things about how economics genuinely does work. It's much easier to learn the truth about economics from the internet than it is to learn it in an economics class these days, because they still teach a lot of the wrong stuff in universities. So there's knowledge there, there's understanding there. People of the future need to take that to the next level.
It's great point. I mean, when I started as an analyst in 1993, there was no internet, there was no, and I was, covering banks in those days, and, even books that you try to find on doing valuation or more forecasting, they didn't have banks, so I just remember in those days, every time that I traveled abroad, bringing back suitcases full of books.
Exactly. Yeah.
And, trying to figure these things out. And now if you're a young person and you say, I want to learn about economics, you take 1 month, you go online, you do your Austrian, economics, you go and you find YouTubes about, the Keynesians, and then you go and find all these different things, you take your notes, you can become educated without going into a university. In fact, going into university, as you say, they're so old. And I mean, like I say, sometimes that the universities are the worst places to learn.
I think that's true in some ways. Absolutely, absolutely. No, you're right. And I think the one thing that I would say though is because there is so much information, that's why, you know, critical faculty or skepticism or questioning or whatever you want to call it, I think that's got to be one of the key sort of traits for people in the future. That, you know, in the past, you know, we didn't know enough. Now there's almost a danger that, you know, we might know too much. So yeah, understanding, I think, is now more important in some ways than knowledge.
That's a great place, and I think we'll wrap it up at that place. But I love the idea, like I say, as an analyst, believe nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, start from that point and say, okay, you've said that. Now, what's your evidence? Let me see, so I can think it through. And if you start from that point of believe nothing, then you can construct your your beliefs or your thinking based upon some solid foundation rather than just believing what people say.
And you know what Socrates would say to that? He'd say, "What do you mean by nothing? What do you mean by believe? Question everything."
Exactly. Beautiful. Well, listen, I thank you for your time, and I know this is valuable for young people out there that are watching. So we'll say goodbye to everybody now, and I'll talk to you for a couple minutes after the video.
Thanks a lot, Andrew.
Yep.